our next panel this afternoon is on the state of European deep tech. So let me introduce you to our moderator. Victoria Slivkoff is the Executive Managing Director of Extreme Tech Challenge, XTC, the world's leading platform for startups tackling the world's most pressing challenges as inspired by the UN Sustainable Development Goals. She also serves as the head of ecosystem at Walden Catalyst Ventures, a global VC firm investing in early-stage deep tech companies in the US, Europe, and Israel. So let's give a warm TNW welcome to Victoria and our panelists.
Oh, 2 glasses.
Great. Thank you so much for joining the European Deep Tech panel. It's wonderful to see all of you here. My name is Victoria. Delighted to be hosting this session today. So this panel discussion is largely built on the insights and findings of a report called the State of European Deep Tech Report that's jointly published by Lakestar, Walden Catalyst, our firm, and Deal Room. And if you're deep tech, it has become the definitive guide, a must-read guide to understanding the landscape, the challenges and opportunities of how do we create global winners out of Europe. So we'll share a QR code to the full report at the end so that you guys can get caught up. So right now I'd like to introduce my guest today, Nicolas Autret, General Partner of Walden Catalyst Ventures. We have Lukas Leitner. He's the founding partner of Drumbeat Capital. And then Bert, Gyselinckx, who's a partner at imec.xpand. So I should also mention that Lukas and Nicolas are 2 of the co-authors of the report, so we're excited to dig into it. So just maybe a brief introduction of your areas of interest. Nicolas?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Victoria. I feel a bit sad not to have as many people as a previous session on, DJing, but hopefully we'll keep the conversation entertaining. So I'm Nicolas Autret. I'm a partner with Walden Catalyst Ventures. As mentioned earlier in the introduction, we're a global VC firm headquartered in the US, but investing across US, Europe, and Israel. We invest in early stage deep tech companies, writing checks from 5 to 25 million, investing particularly in semiconductor, robotics, and AI software companies. Over the years, we have invested in more than 600 companies and 140 IPOs. Currently wrapping up the deployment of our 600 million fund right now. I'm personally based in Paris, covering Europe, and very happy to be here, I think, for the 3rd edition, I think. So great to be here.
Great.
Over to you, Lukas.
My name is Lukas. I previously worked for Lakestar, wrote a European Deep Tech report together with Nicolas. We might not have DJ, but at least we have the best dressed panel, I think, in my opinion. And now I founded a new fund called Drumbeat Capital, actually. It's going to be a transatlantic seed stage deep tech focused fund, 50% US and 50% Europe, and we really want to build the transatlantic bridge for founders, support them with thought leadership and building deep tech companies, and also connecting them across the Atlantic, because we believe that actually enables founders to scale faster and build bigger companies, actually. And the areas that we cover are pretty similar to what we find in the report: space tech, AI, robotics, computational biology, advanced materials, these types of topics.
Bert?
And I'm Bert. I work at imec.xpand, so we invest in nanotechnology-heavy companies, similar to my colleagues here. So that would be semiconductor, photonics, or health tech companies, both US and Europe. Early stage seed to C, I say, is where we shine. And it's also in companies where imec, the R&D center out of Belgium, can add value.
Thank you. So this was the launch of this year's State of Deep Tech report at Hello Tomorrow. So here's a QR code to that panel discussion if you guys like to get ramped up on really the insights and findings of the report. And today we're going to go a little deeper on a couple of sectors and also highlight specific examples and action items about how do we move the needle forward. So with that, let me start with Lukas. Here's a slide on the surprising and misconceptions about European deep tech. So pick a couple that really stood out for you, and where should we be paying closer to attention to this year?
Yeah, so I mean, when we started out writing the deep tech report, we really asked ourselves, okay, what do people believe about deep tech, actually? And one thing you quickly learn when you go out and look into deep tech is that people have a lot of opinions about deep tech. And then the second thing you realize is that most often these opinions are not necessarily true. Oftentimes they're actually wrong, or at least if you add a little bit of nuance to it, then it becomes actually wrong. And so the common conceptions, we try to list them, but they're kind of, okay, this is an undefined term, it needs more capital, it's riskier, it's slow moving, it's not for venture, it takes time to exit, and so on and so forth. And we really looked into it and provided some data points actually to really look into it. Hey, is this actually true or not? And I think one thing that really stood out to me is actually on the one side is deep tech is not riskier. If you look at the graduation rates from C to Series C, A, B, C, D onwards, it's actually the similar failure rates as shallow tech companies in a way. So it's not actually more risky. They do have a different risk profile and they fail for other reasons, but it's not riskier. And then the second thing is at the end of the day is, yes, they need more capital actually. But if you add a little bit of nuance there, the capital that they need is not spent on marketing and advertising budget, but they're used to build IP, to build patents, to really build a moat. So in a sense, CapEx is not a bug of deep tech, it can be a feature if done right. And I think the overall conclusion of the slide, for me at least, is deep tech just plays by its own rules. It's not the same rules as B2B SaaS, and that's okay, and that's actually good. The only thing is that we as investors, as founders, as corporates, as public, have to understand these rules, and we have to learn how to play that game, actually.
Yeah, very insightful. And Nicolas, I want to go to you next. How do you think Europe is uniquely positioned for deep tech? And looking at sort of the current state of the world, we are seeing the influx of more academics and more founders choosing Europe as their base to build deep tech companies. So how do you think that's going to shape the ecosystem?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think Europe has a couple of strengths when it comes to deep tech startup creation, deep tech investment. I think starting with academia, I think we have great academic centers and great research centers all across Europe. Just to name a few, obviously Cambridge, Oxford, TU Delft, ETH Zurich, EPFL, École Polytechnique, etc. And so these are really leading academic centers globally, training fantastic PhDs and masters and bachelors and students in general, and also providing IP. And when you look at deep tech startup creation, usually the starting point is some IP, technology coming out of a lab, and then finding its way into the market. And so having this very dense, high-quality ecosystem of academic centers is a strength that Europe should not be shy of. We always try to compare ourselves with Silicon Valley. We always look at Stanford, MIT, or Berkeley, but we have the MITs of Europe, we have the Berkeleys of Europe, we have the Stanfords of Europe. So I think that's really one great asset we have here. Talent, obviously, and cheap talent. When I look at European companies raising funds, usually, the scale is much smaller. Why? Because talent in Europe is highly qualified, but it is cheap, right? And so we're able to develop companies with a lot less capital. Then, of course, scaling capital is another debate, and maybe that's clearly an area where we need to improve. But at least getting things off the ground with great talent is something we do well in Europe. So, looking at the sectors of expertise and where we're good at, there are a few things. I would say quantum, and by the way, particularly here in the Netherlands, if you look at the number of hardware quantum companies in Europe, it's actually, I think, leading the way probably compared to the US. Robotics, particularly Germany and Switzerland, where you have mechatronics, where you have great expertise, developing mechanical systems, high precision systems. I think robotics is a great category for Europe. And lastly, I would say probably artificial intelligence, so AI, particularly UK and France, where we have a sizable pool of talent. Maybe the last ingredient, I would say, is great quality of life we have in Europe. We have great infrastructure. Life is, cost of living is fairly cheap or fairly affordable compared to the US. So all these ingredients, I think, are key strengths. I don't know if we want to talk about the challenges that we have in Europe now, or if we want to talk about it later, but I think we can really double down on these key elements here in Europe.
Yeah. Great sort of general coverage on the topic. So I want to go to Bert next about how do we create this flywheel of success in deep tech? And I know that could be its own panel discussion by itself, but can you highlight a couple of things that's currently missing in the strategy?
Yes, so my thought is that, I mean, what is well, I think is what Nicolas just mentions, that early stage does pretty well, I think, today in Europe. What I would say we can improve on is that demand side and growth stage. In my previous life, I managed an R&D company in Florida. So I think a big difference there, I mean, you could think of more industrial policy, anchor customers, right? So you have a startup, you need customers. So you could have public policy to have public procurement to buy from startups. That's something that I actively saw happening. Especially if we think that Europe, we're gonna now go to 5% of GDP of defense type of investments. What do you see in the US? You have advanced research projects. I mean, you see that being used to develop the latest and greatest photonics technologies or superconducting digital compute technologies. So that's something I think, I mean, on that demand side where government can play a very active role to get that accelerated. Second item, I mean, that Nicolas also just mentioned is growth capital. I think we're doing pretty well on the early stages, and there's a couple of funds here on the stage even that have a couple of $100 million to spend. So early stage deals, I think we're pretty good. But then it gets to crossover funds to getting to bigger investments. So there we're gonna need to activate other pools of capital. And it's well understood there's a lot of capital. Where is it? In our pension funds. So how can we activate pension funds to be more active and deploy some more of their money in venturing? Today, it's a fraction of a percent that's going into this kind of venturing type of deals. If we only were to get like 1 or 2% of pension fund money into these kind of more risky VC deals, we would be pretty close to doing a decent growth type of funding. And then maybe one more, if I may, is talent. How can you recuperate people that have done this before, right? So you have entrepreneurs, they start a company, they hopefully learn something from all of that, they exit successfully or not, doesn't really matter, but they've been through the exercise before. So the thing is, where I think it would be good to get that flywheel is to recuperate some of those entrepreneurs, get them back in the game through entrepreneur in residence programs, incentivize them anyway to get back in the game and start all over again. Yeah.
Yeah, the ecosystem is super important. And
so by the way, I think so excellent points, and I think you see this flywheel in the shallow, what we call shallow tech, right? So consumer tech, enterprise software. In Europe, we've had a few big companies making it global, like Spotify and Klarna and iZettle and Deliveroo, etc. And so they've reached such a size that you have recycling of talent, recycling of capital. And so it's essentially a generation of operators who learned a job at these scale-ups and who at some point down the road want to become entrepreneurs themselves. So they've been mentored by the entrepreneurs of that first generation of scale-ups, who also, because they made it big, now have cash in their pockets to invest this new generation of wannabe entrepreneurs. And so we do have that flywheel effect in full force in the shallow tech ecosystem in Europe. And I think we're just waiting to see in the deep tech sector some big wins coming up, and then that will trigger the flywheel. So I would say in the deep tech sector, it's in the making. It's not there yet, but hopefully soon it will be there.
And I think one important point in order to realize that is actually that we need more efficient capital markets actually in Europe at the end of the day, because we need capital and we need actually exits in order to have these second-time founders or third-time founders also have some money and say like, hey, I'm going to go into the ring again because I already made some money. And I think really harmonizing the capital markets, it's not only relevant for deep tech, but also for the entire venture class actually. Because if you look also at the market cap of European companies right now, it's like, I mean, 100 years ago, we almost owned 40 of the 100 most valuable companies. Now I think we're, in 2005, we were at 25% global market cap, and now we're down to 8% of overall global market cap, versus the US is at 60 to 70%. And so we need to do something about the capital markets, actually, if we really want to get that flywheel also going.
Yeah, I want to go back to that success breeds success. So where's the PayPal mafia of Europe, right? You have the Klarna mafia, and now I feel like you have the DeepMind mafia, right? Spinning out companies. So I think it's getting going, but definitely we need more founders that are reinvesting in the ecosystem. So let me go back to Lukas. You've seen innovation hubs like in UK and Germany and France really punching above their weight. So what are the lessons learned? What are they doing right, very concisely, that other countries can replicate?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like a lot of things they did wrong in the past, right? If you look at the UK model, it was basically put a pub next to your university, wait for 800 years, and hope that some biotech companies will come out of it. Or France trying to, okay, let's try it with central planning, add a little bit of top engineering, a little bit of French wine, and then you hope you get some AI companies. And the German approach will probably be look at the flip chart, list all of the risks, and you think about it until you find a business model in a company that has no risk, and until then we don't do anything on the kind of the excellent side. But I think what it's slowly starting to change is actually what Nicolas mentioned, is that we really need these centers of excellence. Like, obviously, everybody's on LinkedIn. If you go to LinkedIn, everybody writes about, oh, you have to go to San Francisco because the energy is amazing. You go to a coffee shop and you meet someone who is thinking about the same problems as you are. And yes, it's a little bit of a social media LinkedIn type of bubble, reinforced bubble, but there is a certain truth to it that success breeds success, and you need these centers of excellence in order to kind of bring smart people together, talk about the same problems. You might meet someone at a party that was thinking about a similar problem that you right now have, but already found a solution. So really having kind of these centers of excellence. And in order to achieve that, we need to think as Europeans, actually, not as national. So we shouldn't love all our kids equal, but really say like, okay, let's have Paris for AI. Let's do robotics in Munich and Zurich. So really focusing the money and the efforts on certain technologies, but that needs a kind of a European thinking that is required. And yeah, I think we're slowly starting to see that in London, Paris, and Munich, but we need more of that type of thinking actually in Europe to pull this off actually.
Now I want to take us through a couple of deep dives in 3 sectors. What are the opportunities? What are some of the exciting developments? So Bert, I want to start with you with semiconductors.
Semiconductors. I always ask people, what is next after semiconductors? Full conductors, but no. Semiconductors, I think, very hot space right now. Lots of things happening, especially, of course, AI is driving a lot of it, so you see a lot of innovation in novel compute technologies. A lot of, it's all compute, memory, interconnect, a lot of new materials. I just got a question, I mean, is it the end of Moore's law? I mean, will scaling stop? In a way, yes, but then there's all kinds of new materials, new ways of doing things, superconducting stuff, optical compute, quantum compute, a whole slew of new things that are emerging that I think will be very transformational over the next decade. So it's not going to happen overnight, but it definitely will have a big impact on the next couple of years, longer term.
And I think the Netherlands has a specific unfair advantage in semi, right? Given its national prominence with ASML, creating a whole ecosystem around that. So an area that's really interesting to me, exciting for me, is the emergence of AI moving from the digital world to physical world, and physical AI, manifesting it in robotics. So Nicolas, what's exciting to you in this space?
Yeah, we're spending a lot of time in robotics right now. As mentioned earlier, I think Europe has something to say there. I think the interesting thing is robotics is not new as a category. I think the very, very first robot was invented, I think, in the 50s. So like 70 years ago, so it's not new, but sure, it took time to mature, and we had different ways of adoption. I think the first way was in the manufacturing vertical, particularly automotive, so manufacturing lines, assembly lines were the first one to deploy robotic robots. robotic arms, sorry, and so that was really the first wave. Then you had second wave, which I think was early 2000 in the warehouse and logistics space. Companies like Kiva, which was eventually acquired by Amazon, moving around items in these big warehouses. And if you look at these two verticals which adopted robotics first, the reason is they were missing labor. Shortage of labor was a key driving factor for adoption of robotics. Then 2010s, you had autonomous driving, which was very interesting because it really drove the development of components, LiDARs, cameras, computing, and now today you have physical AI, so a new wave of robotic, which benefit essentially from 50, 60, 70 years of development, both on the hardware and more now on the software, where you start seeing new forms of robotics, whether it's humanoids, drones, four-legged robots, ground robots, being deployed in environments which are fully open, and so where the complexity is a lot higher. So plenty of innovation to address that opportunity. New materials to make robots lighter, but also on the battery side to make the autonomy of robots longer. New perception systems, new drives to make the robots more agile. And then on the software side, simulation is a big thing, right? To develop these models where allowing humanoid robots, for example, to do daily tasks. That's very exciting for us. We see a big, big opportunity because, again, in all these industries, you have shortage of labor. And the demand is going to be very high, so we're going to see potential to build these very big companies. So that's what we're spending time on right now, and particularly in Europe.
And I think the other factor is actually in the US, if you think about that whole trend of reshoring and nearshoring and so on. So Trump wants to bring back all of these manufacturing jobs and so on. But labor costs in the US are so much higher, actually. So in order to kind of have viable unit economics, you need automation actually to make the unit economics work, if you really want to bring that back, the manufacturing jobs actually.
But people are also worried that robots are going to take our jobs. So how should we think about that, Nicolas?
Next subject. No, I think it's a legitimate concern on the very long run. Having said that, I remember, we've had that conversation many, many times, right? And when you look at cars, 100 years ago, people had the same concerns. The horse carriage had the same concerns. Oh, wow, cars are arriving, they're going to steal our jobs. Well, it turns out, it was actually economic development driver. And so I think robotics is going to be the same. It's going to enable new use cases. It's going to shift job maybe to another direction. But I think on the long term, our society or humanity as a whole is going to benefit from this shift.
Have you actually seen the Honda horse, the robot horse?
Yes,
that was
I
a
saw
commercial that you can ride on a Honda robot horse.
Yes.
We go back.
Pretty cool.
We go back. Very cool. So, should Europe be replicating Silicon Valley, such a magical place? Bert?
Should we replicate Silicon Valley? I don't think so. I think it's probably good to work from our own strengths, and there's definitely some good things in the valley. But I think it's inherently very hard to copy that model. Yeah. It's a unique environment with their. And I think what you can learn from it, if you bring a lot of talent together with a lot of capital, wonderful things will happen. Mm-hmm. But we need to, referring back to that flywheel, we need to find our own flywheel and get that into motion. And it will have some similarities with what's happening in the Bay, but it should not be a direct clone, in my opinion.
And I think Lukas and Nicolas, you would agree with that too, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. Again, we often get that question: how do we compare with Silicon Valley, and how to replicate Silicon Valley? It's usually a question that politics say, how can we create a European Silicon Valley? And it's just a wrong debate, I think. We shouldn't try to replicate. We should try to find our own formula. If you look at Silicon Valley, it's the outcome. The reason it's working so well today, it didn't happen overnight, right? It's the outcome of 60 years of iteration. And I'm sure many of you have been to Silicon Valley, and you see that it's a very, very specific ecosystem. where in a very small area, you have leading universities, you have all these big corporations, tech corporations, you have entrepreneurs, you have investors, and all of that together, as you mentioned earlier, Lukas, right? They sit at cafes and they exchange ideas, and then something come up, someone takes the lead, and then his friends working in corporations join. We don't have that in Europe, and we probably never have that density of talent in one single area. So we need to find our own recipe. Having said that, I think there are best practices from Silicon Valley and a mindset that we need to embrace, right? We should be inspired from that. And one lesson we are trying to share with our entrepreneurs here in Europe is, the speed and scale. Having that ambition to go global from day one, and having the speed of execution, because it's really about speed of execution, having that speed of execution implemented, right? So speed and scale is really something that you see in Silicon Valley that you probably don't see enough here in Europe, right? And so that's one best practice that we need to replicate here.
Yeah.
My 2 cents.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. At the end of the day, it's really, there's so many things that we can learn from them. Obviously, we have to find our own ways, but my perception is that we're still far away, and there's so many things that we can still learn from the Valley or how the US actually operates, and just try to kind of cut the edges and make it even better, actually, find a better model. But especially as Nicolas said, I think, having irrational confidence. I mean, if you talk to US founders, actually they believe everything is solvable and every problem is solvable, and then they hire 50% of the world to go solve that problem actually for them. And I think we should have the same confidence actually, and sometimes it's irrational, but they're selling kind of, we're going to colonize the Mars. And if I speak to European founders, it's basically, we're going to be the market leader for the mid-market DACH region for equipment tooling software or something like that. It's also nice, and you can build a sustainable business, but I find that other vision more appealing. And if you build reusable rockets on the way with a 100-ton payload, you're fine. It's okay if you don't colonize Mars. And maybe he will, but having that irrational overconfidence is, I think, something that we can learn from. And the second thing, especially as a German, prioritize speed over precision. Like you can spend hours on the flip chart, think everything through, but at some point you just got to do something and go out there, try, test, break things, and then eventually also apologize later. But I think these 2 things are really something that we can learn from the Valley. And then regarding the regulation, I think Europe can find its own way, and maybe we even find a better model. Right now, we probably have the worst model, but I'm optimistic that we find something that is actually even better than in the US.
Well, but let's stay on that thought of optimism. And as we close the panel, we got a couple of more minutes. I want to hear about your boldest prediction for European deep tech over the next 3 years. So let me start with Bert.
I hope to see a pan-European semiconductor company that is championing some, I don't know, AI or defense tech type of technology. Yeah, that's what I hope to see.
Super. And let's go to Lukas next.
I believe people will wake up to the reality that deep tech is geopolitical power. And it's tied to national pride, actually, and it's tied to national power. And I believe that we will see 3-4 deep tech areas where Europe will be leading. At least that's what I hope. We lost a lot of technologies, like, for example, solar, wind, batteries, potentially AI, but I do believe that we will be leader in a couple of these technologies, and one of the contenders right now, in my opinion, is, for example, nuclear fusion.
I was hoping to play the sovereignty card, so you stole my spot there. I think the same, absolutely. I mean, today, our lives are essentially run by US big tech, right? We had Google in search, Meta in social. Now it's going to be OpenAI. I don't know how many of you use OpenAI, but I use it a lot, or Claude, or whatever. And
Mistral.
Or Mistral, yes. So, but Mistral. My point, right? My point. I think today Europe remains too fragmented, and as you alluded to, each country wants to see emerge a national champion that eventually will become a European or global champion. 3 years from now, I just hope that, or pray or whatever, but I hope that Europe will act as a unified continent, not to create national champions who eventually become global champions, but to create European champions. And that all countries, all governments, all investors, entrepreneurs, talent, all of us at some point forget about our national and domestic differences, but join forces, supporting the emergence and the creation of one global or many global champions out of Europe, so that we gain our sovereignty back. Because I'm tired of putting my data into the hands of US companies.
We should all play nice together, but I am very optimistic about the future of European deep tech. This has been a really terrific conversation. We've got the QR code up here for you to scan and download the full report. It's 186 slides of rich insights and findings, and also actionable recommendations that can help us propel forward. So I'd like to thank my wonderful panelists again, Nicolas Autret, Lukas Leitner, and then Bert Gyselinckx. Thank you so much for your thought.